Ready to go? All right, today is August 14. I'm calling to order the meeting of the Meridian Township Planning Commission. First thing I'm going to do is call the roll. Vice Chair Tresize.
Here.
Commissioner Shrewsbury notified us she wouldn't be able to make it. Commissioner McConnell.
Here.
Commissioner McCurtis.
Here.
Commissioner Scales.
Here.
Commissioner Brooks. Here. Commissioner Snyder.
Here.
Commissioner Richards.
Here.
And the Chair Bloomer is here. We have a quorum. The record should reflect that there are no public present for the purpose of public remarks. So the next item is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion for that?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Richards, a second.
Support.
Supported by Commissioner Tresize. All in favor?
Aye.
There is no opposition. The agenda is approved. We have the minutes from.
Wait a second. We have no more so moves, don't forget. That's what our training taught us. Let's say the motions.
Motion to approve the agenda.
All right, the agenda is approved with the condition that we'll straighten out the terminology. Next item is number 5, approval of the minutes of the July 24 meeting.
I move we approve the minutes of the July 24, 2023 meeting.
Support.
All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
There is no opposition. The minutes are approved. Communications. Are there communications that we have to be aware of?
The only communications we have this evening is an email from Commissioner Brooks, who wanted to share his thoughts on the draft, and I will briefly go over those officially for the record once we get to that point.
Very good. Right. Public hearings. This doesn't qualify as a public hearing, does it?
Correct.
So there are no public hearings on today's agenda. Therefore, we move into unfinished business. And there is no unfinished business scheduled for this meeting. Other business, none. So we are now on item 10, discussion of the draft master plan.
Thank you, Chair Bloomer. And what I'll do is I'll just briefly go through things for the commissioners that weren't here last time, and for those that would like a quick refresher as to where we're at with the draft, and then I'd like to briefly then touch on Commissioner Brooks' comments just off the bat, since I have those in front of me. So this is, again, update to the 5-year master plan. This is stress on the update. Given the, nature of the pandemic that we are still trudging through, a lot both has changed and hasn't changed. And so from a development perspective, we view this as an iteration of the previous plan, which was a complete overhaul of our plan. And so we've set it up consistent with the format of our brand standards for the township. And again, all the appreciation in the world to the communications team that have worked on this. It's really good. We're really happy with the way it looks. I will point out that on each of these items in the table of contents, you can't click on it and go directly to that page if you just want to look at something specific. It starts off with a brief executive summary talking about the update and the relatively minimal changes that are made to the future land use map, the urban service boundary, and the big changes is updating the goals and objectives to our current situation. And then we start talking about the goals and objectives. These fall into 5 main goals that we've previously shared with the commission. Preserve and strengthen residential neighborhoods, which is in the previous plan. Enhance the viability of township businesses, which was in the previous plan. Maintain outstanding public services, which is slightly tweaked.
I'm sorry to interrupt. What was the password for the
So the password for the Wi-Fi,
yes.
just 1 second.
I think it's M17.
I apologize.
No, it's okay. It's Meridian Guest is obviously the network, and the password is capital M in Meridian Guest, all one word, with an exclamation point at the end.
There we go. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Again, maintain outstanding public services is sort of a blend of a couple from the previous plan, trying to still cover that. Further analyze the potential intensity change areas is something new that we've added because we want to build on those PICAs that we spent time working on and creating in the last plan. And then the last one is balance environmental preservation and strategic growth. This is really trying to get at the heart of some of the work that the Planning Commission will be doing in the future here. There's also a series of items that we've included that are, these specific, relatively specific things that we didn't want to lose in the blending them into another goal, or that they didn't really fall into another goal specifically. And so this really is what I consider the start of sort of our implementation. Like, these are specific items that we can start to tackle relatively quickly. The future land use plan is, what is the nuts and bolts. This is the map that shows roughly where things are proposed within the township. We do now have active links, so if you click on this, it'll take you directly to the map. The plan itself, this text really is just getting into the specifics of the changes that were made. So relatively few changes in this plan. The zoning plan is as I said last time, sort of the nexus between the future land use plan and the zoning ordinance. This is what kind of connects the two pieces. And then there's a couple of recommendations from a zoning perspective. These are actually carryovers from the previous plan. We'll continue to implement these as we move forward. The potential intensity change areas. So staff's approach to this is a little different. So this is the information that's in the previous plan. We have it posted to the website. And each of the 3 PICAs has a 2-pager out of the previous plan. What we are recommending as part of this update is that we build on those and give them a little more focus as we go forward. And spend some time, create small area plans, get some focus on them. We've had success with Hazlitt Village Square. That was one of the PICAs. That was one of the priority sites through the MEDC, and it is very close to starting construction. I was hoping to be able to say when, but we're not quite there yet. So we think that building on this PICA concept over the next 5 years is going to be a good outcome for the township. The urban service boundary, again, as I've mentioned multiple times through my time here, We have to talk about it, we have to study it every time we do a master plan update because it was adopted as part of the master plan. Staff is recommending 2 changes that we've previously discussed with the board, with the planning commission. Again, links are active, so you can click on it and go to the overall map. The build-out analysis is the newest piece. This is something that staff worked on to try and get a sense of where are we going from here in terms of raw numbers. This is a first glance at this. We hope to spend some more time on this over the next several years and have a more robust analysis for the next master plan update. And then we closed the plan with the good stuff, the natural features that we find in the township. And we're not trying to recreate the wheel. A lot of this is in the existing plan. A lot of this is in the parks plan. What we're trying to do here is to get people aware of these items so they can go seek more information if they so desire. Talking about transportation, all these links, again, active links to the topic at hand. This is the Pathway Master Plan that was adopted early last year. This is the link to CATA, if I remember correctly. My eyesight is terrible. These are border wire and light consumers, additional infrastructure pieces, and this is the other plans in the township that we wanted to make sure we specifically reference: the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, Climate Sustainability Plan, and the DDA Integrated Plan. And as these plans get updated, we will be able to, these links will automatically update. So you'll have the most recent one at each of these places. And so that's where we find ourselves with the draft master plan. And if you'll indulge me while I have this, I would like to briefly talk about Commissioner Brooks' questions.
Before we
But yeah.
do that, I'm wondering if our intention is to go sort of particular order in discussion. It's actually a fairly long document, like 26 pages, yeah? And a lot of it we've seen before, and we don't have to go into great detail on everything, but I'm just wondering, do you want to structure the discussion around sort of high-level stuff first and then start drilling down in the details, see how far we get? Or, because I could rattle off 30, but that doesn't seem constructive.
I apologize. I'm also curious about kind of how we want to structure the conversation, and if tonight is going to be our only opportunity, or...
Absolutely not. So I will say that what we would like to get out tonight is if there are any major issues or changes that we need to make, we would like to address those now so that what our goal is to, and I should have prefaced this at the beginning, as I did last time, but under the Michigan enabling legislation, once we do a notice of intent to plan at the beginning, we take our time, put the plan together, and then once we have a draft, we essentially go into a quiet period of 63 days, which allows all the surrounding agencies, all the utilities, all the infrastructure to make whatever comment they want to make. And so obviously we'll be able to talk about it as much as we want during that period, but what we need to do is we need to get to a point where that draft is out there. Mm-hmm. So what we're hoping is to get any major high-level stuff now. At the next meeting, ask that the Planning Commission refer the matter to the Township Board for distribution only. And then I know that the chairperson has had conversations with the supervisor about having potentially a joint meeting. Certainly, we will get comment from surrounding communities and other agencies, and whatever other comment that the public or the Planning Commission has over the course of those 63 days, try and incorporate that all into a plan that we will hopefully adopt November.
It seems to me the best way for us to do this is to start off by asking if any commissioners have any major questions, confusion about the project, or the outline that's been presented thus far. Anybody want to raise any issues simply on where we're going
In terms of process?
Yeah.
Well, I'm clear on that.
All right. Does anyone have any comments that they want to make about what we have seen thus far with the presentation from the township planning staff? Commissioner Scott.
I'd like us to address Commissioner Brooks's issues since we have those all out in front of us.
I'm sorry.
I think in terms of, excuse me for butting in here, but I thought the agreement was we were gonna get at the high level. And so we'd have to actually look at his and see which ones of those are high level and which ones aren't. We're gonna get to the high level first, to make sure that we get the feedback to the staff so they can move forward.
Yeah, my recommendation, if I might, Mr. Chair, was that we start with the goals, since there's a very limited number of them. And if if we're okay at that level, then we can move into some of the more detailed parts. Does that make some sense?
No, I agree with that.
And I don't think that'll take us long, because we've seen these before, but, so. And I have not looked at Commissioner Brooks's comments to see if any of them address something at the level of a goal. They,
They all seem pretty specific.
Yeah, these
As I looked them over.
yeah, I agree. It appears to me that these are more detail-oriented questions rather than
Yeah.
overall goals.
I think they would all fall within some of the goals listed.
Yeah. Let me start it off by asking, it's pretty clear to everyone that Meridian Township has two primary sister jurisdictions, Michigan State University and East Lansing, that are very close to us in all aspects. Is one of the goals to coordinate our master plan with the master plans of those two other agencies?
Well, so to the extent that we can do that, we obviously, that's what the distribution and comment process is intended to do, and the same when they would send something to us. We've obviously, and I believe I've distributed this previously to the Planning Commission about the planning process that occurred in the last year at Michigan State, and I participated in that multiple times and understood where we can have an impact and where we can't, and there are actually a couple of goals within the existing plan about how do we further that, especially in light of a couple of things. One, that we've got the Van Camp Center on Dawn Avenue within the township, and what does that look like going forward? How do we support the businesses within there to be a part, as they've started in Meridian Township, how do we help grow them in Meridian Township? And then what is the interaction on Hagedorn Road look like going forward, I think, with Michigan State's new plan of having the medical campus start to turn outwards towards Hagedorn and the purchase of the I properties by Michigan State. And so I think to the extent that they are aligned with us and we understand where they're headed, I think that's the key. We can't, they tend to swing a little higher weight than I do, but they are very much trying to be good neighbors at all times. So I will say there is coordination to the extent we can coordinate.
Questions?
well, I have something that occurred to me about actually the goal that's on here, but are we at that stage of diving in at the goal level?
Yeah, if it's a goal question or objective, go for it.
I think it's mainly wording. As I read the title, which I think is probably inherited from the existing master plan.
It is.
And it sounds wonderful. I think a planning consultant could easily come up with something like that. But when I look at preserving a residential neighborhood, I'm trying to figure out what I'm trying to preserve it from. And I don't see anything in the section that describes something that a residential neighborhood should be preserved from. And I'm not really sure what residential neighborhoods mean. As I read further down in the details, I see future homeowners associations, existing neighborhoods, which in my experience tend to be single-family or condo associations that associate. But the other half of our population that lives in multifamily housing is not typically a member of an association, or I don't know, what's a residential neighborhood? How does that, And I'm just wondering if we can maybe find some words, not as a group, but that somehow align better with the objectives that are spelled out there, which to me look like, let's evolve our housing stock to meet changing needs, whether it's for home businesses or accessory dwelling units or a broader range of people and a broader range of configurations. Seems to me the great stuff that's going on in that, under that goal, but the title kind of feels like, sorry, it's crass, protecting property values. It kind of feels that, and that's not what the specific stuff in there is about. Does that make any sense? Am I being too nitpicky with wording?
But listening to you, I see where you're coming from. Preserve implies status quo. And much that is in there talks about changing the status quo. We still want to preserve the residential neighborhoods, and to the extent that we want to maintain, we have good housing stock, we want to have opportunities for people, but the goals are listed underneath that do not really look at preservation of current situation as much as adapting. And I think that's what you were getting at.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Richards.
I guess sort of to, not necessarily add or comment about that, but I guess having sat here for several years, I know we've had a lot of comment about mixed-use developments ended up being rental housing projects. And so, and we're seeing, lots of new coming on board. I guess I'd question if we want to continue to encourage the development of new mixed-use developments or not, as opposed to, again, getting back to the single-family or the smaller housing units, that sort of thing. So I guess to me, a major question is, do we want to continue to encourage, with everything we have going on now and what's happened in the last 5 years, new mixed-use developments? I guess I myself would say encourage is too strong for me. And I know that's what's selling financially right now, but I guess at least some discussion about whether we really want to encourage new mixed-use developments as the first thing under preserve and strengthen residential neighborhoods.
I just have a quick clarifying question. So are we going to go one goal at a time and talk about the goal and then circle back and go through each goal? Or are we right now going to go through this goal into the details? I just want clarification so that we all know what we're doing.
This is the only thing that I really wanted to talk about under this. It just
Well, there you
happens
go.
to- it
There are
just happens
details
to
for
be
me too that I want
first.
to talk about.
Yeah, so this just happens to be first, but that's,
Sure.
I don't intend to nitpick the whole first goal.
I'm just afraid if we keep going down the rabbit hole with each goal, we'll just be spinning our wheels all night and not actually accomplish anything. So I'd rather see, and this is subject to everybody else's approval, but what I envisioned tonight was for us to discuss the goals themselves and then thereafter go into the detail of what each goal means and how it could be restructured if possible.
Sure.
I do agree that preserve and strengthen residential neighborhoods is an awfully broad category of a goal. That's not necessarily bad.
I have a thought here, and I'm wondering if we add a second goal to get to everything but single-family residential. So I guess my thought would be preserve and strengthen single-family residential neighborhoods, have that as a goal. And then a second goal regarding everything other than single-family residential. Or if you want to say single-family residential and condominiums or something, but I'm just wondering if, because they are so different in a lot of ways, and we're seeing more and more we're seeing some single family, but certainly a lot more apartment units. So anyway, that's a thought in terms of the big picture. We want to, break that into two goals.
Mr. Scales?
With all due respect, Chair, we're sitting here having a discussion like this is the first time we saw these goals. We've seen these goals time and time and time again. At what point are we going to lock in so that we can move this forward?
The way I see it, what we're doing right now is trying to figure out what the skeleton is, and then we'll start putting the meat on the skeleton after we figure that out. For instance, what I see here is actually preserve and strengthen residential neighborhoods. That includes both single-family and condominiums, and even apartment complexes. Maybe if we break it down into separate goals and say, preserve and strengthen single-family residences as one goal, preserve and strengthen or encourage the development of multifamily residential neighborhoods as a separate goal. And then from there, we can talk about what does that really mean and how does that work?
Yeah, when I look at the details that are underneath that goal, it's about trying to increase density with accelerated dwelling units and things which we can agree or disagree on. But is that single-family housing now, or is that multifamily housing? Is it? And I think, in my view, the more the residential development of the township is considered holistically, the better, personally. So I like having all that in that section. I just feel like this goal that we inherited has, late in the day, I will agree, struck me as not representative of all the great stuff I see underneath it. I just, doesn't do it for me. It leaves all, so. But if everybody else likes it, we don't have to spin our wheels. If it's not bugging anybody else, it's.
Well, remember though, this is far from the only goal.
Oh, yeah, no, and this is I promise, I'm not going to wordsmith any other goals.
I think maybe a word like, because the language beneath it to me is more like it's innovative. And it's, to me, the tone is like a tone of like a willingness to think outside the box. And preserve kind of is more indicative of a digging into what we have always done. So I would agree that that word's problematic, and maybe it's just a matter of swapping out for a more appropriate verb that gets at the vision better. I would also agree, I personally prefer this goal to encapsulate residential neighborhoods more broadly, because then if you start kind of dissecting it, I think that you're going to have the same issues in the other sections too, like with township businesses. Well, there's lots of different types of township businesses. So I like the broadness of it. I don't see that as a problem. But yeah, maybe preserve could just be swapped out for something that's a little more accurate for where we're headed.
Maybe the word neighborhood is the issue. And preserve and strengthen residential opportunities and add a paragraph in there dealing with single family and maintaining good housing stock and whatever, and included in that list.
I love residential opportunities. That's what I feel that section talks about, is expanding and strengthening and expanding residential opportunities, to me, is aspirational.
And I think
And this
that would
feels very
include
conservative.
something about single-family residence, which is not mentioned directly in there, other than around Lake Lansing. But if there was also a listing of preserving the value of our housing stock and quality of living, single-family residence, that would complete that goal and broaden it and cover all of our different housing opportunities.
That's why I brought him here.
Right on.
I listened to you guys long enough, I come up with.
I was actually going to suggest strengthen residential opportunities. In the Yeah, we can, that feels like encapsulating this conversation and then trying to get at a little more single-family conversation below that. I think we can
It doesn't have to be in great detail, it's just
Yeah.
making sure that it's clear that single-family houses and the housing stock is also important to the township.
I do like that word expanding too, though. Expanding opportunities, especially because if you say expanding neighborhoods, then it sounds like we're growing them out, you know, but with opportunities, there's no indication that we're gonna go taking up more land to do it.
But I think it is important, the words preserve and strengthen are necessary because remember, the fundamental basis of this community is primarily residential. There is a commercial corridor or two, Okemos Road and Grand River. But aside from that, basically, we're talking about overwhelmingly residential community. And I think a fundamental goal of the plan is to not fundamentally change the character of the community. We can preserve it, we can encourage growth in certain areas, but preserving the fundamental nature of the community, I think, is foremost.
Well, devil's advocate, right, there are residences in the community that we don't want to preserve, right? Some of them just got knocked down and they built something really nice there, or they're gonna build something really nice. So not all of our residential stock is what we're hoping to preserve, so. Yeah, there's a lot of really nice single-family home residence neighborhoods that people, yeah, everybody wants to preserve, but, so that's what kind of gets me about
Yeah,
that.
and I didn't mean to imply by what I said that we're talking about making sure that this type of house only exists in this type of neighborhood.
Of course.
Because that's why I think we changed to the phrase opportunities. Preserve and strengthen residential opportunities, I think is ideal. What about the next goal? Anybody have any comments on enhancing viability of township businesses?
I'm for it.
Who says no? My comment that I was gonna make is that we do talk a lot in the previous goal about home businesses, and this one is more aimed at traditional, toward brick and mortar. And having those crosswalks between them, say, hey, go look at the next one for more about business. Good. It's different stuff.
Maintaining outstanding public services.
Perfect. I just happen to love the very last bullet point on there, invert the transportation planning process.
It came up in a conversation, and it makes a certain amount of sense. I mean, it's something that frankly we're going to struggle with because we don't control our roads, but it's something that it's well worth looking into to see where we can have an impact with the state and the county going forward. And I think we are going to find that there is going to be some long-term changes as a result of the pandemic in terms of traffic patterns. I think it's still really unclear as to what's going to happen with going full-time office employment. It's still unclear if certain retail industries are ever going to fully recover, and it gives us an opportunity to look at some of these things and how do we tackle them in new builds, because they do have different traffic patterns now.
I think that was one of Commissioner Brooks's comments as well. His third comment was about the transportation planning process.
Yeah, and I don't have the answer to that question right now. That was going to be my response to that one. That is something that we're going to have to look into in coming years as to what do we need to change to better align ourselves with the new paradigm.
Any other comments on maintaining outstanding public services? Picas? I want to thank the staff for somewhere in this document including a definition of a pica.
Yeah, it's in the section where we talk about it, we talk about what they are. Trying to put this in order was a bit of a challenge because you do define things later on, but this is the best way the goals and objectives should be foremost in this document. So you get the definition later.
Is the goal simply to analyze picas or to encourage the development of picas?
So I think it's both, and I think from our perspective, one of the things that I think we should do, and something that I would have started 5 years ago, is now we have these concepts of these areas. Okay, let's build them out more. Let's flesh out the ideas. Let's, create some marketing plans for them, work with the MEDC to get them as part of the RRC. We can have our priority sites out there. What are these next steps? Especially now that we've had some success with Hazlitt Village Square. So I think this is a good time to jump into that. I think, frankly, the first step is probably the mall. I think everyone recognizes that we need to talk about the next act for the mall property and what does that look like. And I think by designating it as a PICA and then studying it a little bit and figuring out what we do, the kinds of things we would want there, the kinds of, what does the population density look like in the area, getting some of the demographics down a little bit and really talking to the property owners as well as to what their long-term plan is. Because there's some complications, make no mistake, it's not easy. It may be a giant parking lot in many spaces, but it was built in the 70s, it's got DSL internet on the property. It has virtually no stormwater management. So there are some challenges to redeveloping the site, and we need to go into it with eyes wide open. It's not going to be an overnight process.
Let me ask you, based on your experience, and this has to do with how we structure the goal. When you have an area designated as a PICA, and there are 4 of them right now?
There are 3 right now. We're recommending a 4th.
Do they have the potential to change because of what the township does to the PICA, or because a builder comes and says, I want to buy that property and build on it? What are you going to do about it?
Well, so I would say with Hazlitt, part of the reason there was a builder that looked at it was because we had already identified, here's a rough layout of what we would like to see on this property. If you come forward with something in this ballpark, it's already been vetted through our master plan. And functionally, if you look at what we have in the existing plan versus the plan that was approved, you can see a lot of the shadows between the two. They align in many ways. And so I think what it does is it puts the information out there to the development community and the investment community that, look, we're interested in talking about these properties. We're interested in whether it's higher density or whether it's a different form of development or whether it's a specific type of use. These are the areas where we'd like to see it, and here's why, and here's that sort of that path forward under the designation. It just makes it a little more viable and friendly going forward.
I could add that there has been discussion over the years of what that property might look like, and obviously the mall owners have come out publicly and said that that's their vision, something different. So having a basis from our standpoint to say this is what the kinds of things we'd like to see there makes perfect sense to me. And connecting it to Four Corners makes a lot of sense to me.
It seems to me from the perspective of analyzing the goal itself, the township is better off if the goal says that we will try to figure out the best way to utilize the property, rather than a situation where we're waiting for an owner to come to us and say, I want to put $40 million into that property. If you don't like it, I'll take my money elsewhere. It seems to me that we can both control it better and encourage growth if we propose development of PICAs. Analyze and propose potential development. Because right now, the reason they're PICAs is because it's essentially commercially dead property.
Yeah, I was thinking along similar lines, like maybe the goal should be further analyze potential intensity change areas and form strategic partnerships to encourage redevelopment, something like that.
That stuff is in the bullets, work with property
Yeah.
owners, the carriage hills, and so that stuff's there. It's a matter of how much to try to put in the, I like having the definition of peak is in there. If we're gonna keep using that term, the higher up it comes, the better. While those 2 pages in the existing plan actually contain maps, and that's where the conceptual sort of layout was presented to the potential builders. And as Director Schmidt was saying, in Hazlet, they said, yeah, we'll build that, and Okemos are not quite settled on something.
Well, I think the second paragraph talking about develop small area plans for PICAs is essentially saying we need to go back to what was done 5 years ago, look at the map, the structure, whatever, and see if they need to be tweaked. But we can design these things to such a point that no builder is going to want to build them too. So we have to remain flexibility, or we will have nobody shopping there for us.
And that's why I think the biggest positive, I won't say the biggest positive out of the way they originally established them is they left it pretty flexible. Here's roughly an outline of what we would like to see in these areas. Here's some demographics, here's what we think could potentially go here. I think we can take that a little further.
Well, the other thing we did as part of that was to do the study as to public demand, what needs to go in there. That needs to be updated for the carriage hills, for if we do Meridian Mall, to have some details to dangle in front of a developer saying, we know people want this, we know our community wants this, they will support you. This is what we think will go in there. What are your thoughts? But I think it's almost a chicken and egg. If you give them something to look at, they'll come and maybe look at it. If you give them a blank slate, you may or may not have anybody there.
I agree. I think the blank slate tends to lead towards more contentious issues in these redevelopment opportunities. I think if we are able to put forward a concept of what roughly the township is looking for, you are going to attract the right kind of developer too, because that's important. You know, a single-family developer probably shouldn't be dabbling in multifamily projects in most cases because it's out of their general wheelhouse. It's not to say there aren't exceptions to the rule, but I tend to appreciate it when you get someone with commercial experience doing commercial redevelopment. So I think what we can do is to try and get a little more action wordy here on this one, and to Commissioner Snyder's point and some of the comments from the chair, I think we can probably tweak this one a little tiny bit and make it work.
No?
I agree.
Thank you. No? All right, so let's. Anybody have any comments on this particular goal?
So strategic growth, I think that, when somebody sees that, they just can't help but envision, outward sprawl. But I don't even think there's a way to have that in a township. Like, there's nowhere to sprawl to. So I don't know. I'm just kind of curious of strategic growth. I don't know.
Can I?
If that's the right language. I don't know, because that's what I see in my mind when I think strategic growth, this sprawl of development, and I think that's misleading because that's not really what we're after.
In this one? Okay.
Yeah, I have looked hard at that one for years, and I'm pretty comfortable with it.
Okay.
I think we do have some very strategic growth principles embedded in the plan. So we're not saying we're not going to grow. We know that people want to come and live here, and we want to accommodate them. We're going to do that, but we're going to do it thoughtfully. So I'm personally we do have a whole bunch of land that could be developed. And our question in when we get to what's going to happen outside the urban service boundary at some point, then that's the question is how can we be strategic about getting the sort of development there that we would like to see, that serves the demographics that we think are important, that provides the ecological functions that we know are needed. So I think we still got a whole lot more strategizing to do.
I would think that strategic growth in this context is the absolute opposite of sprawl. It is to choose your places, do it in consideration of the environment, infill where possible, and preserve as much of the environmental pluses as you can. And that's the strategy.
I would say then maybe swap them so that the emphasis, it ends with preservation. Sorry, I'm being nitpicky, but.
No, that actually makes
makes
sense.
sense.
That makes sense.
Mr. Scales?
I think this goal and the supporting documentation underneath the goal, that sums up who we are here in Meridian Township. And I like it just as it is.
This one does feel like Meridian Township. I agree. This is a new one, actually. This is one we're trying to cobble some things together from the previous plan, along with adding some things that have been talked about. And yeah, this one feels like the heart and soul.
I agree with Commissioner Scales that this is central to the understanding of Meridian Township, although I do have to say I agree with Christina that just simply switching the last two, balance environmental, strategic growth, and preservation, seems to rebalance the emphasis.
Well, I support that as well. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you when you said that.
That's okay.
Chair. I think if you're going to move that, you would balance strategic growth and environmental preservation,
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
just to get it clear.
Did I say it wrong?
Well, you left environmental with strategic growth.
And environmental strategic growth.
Yeah. Just want to.
All our preserving, yes.
It's a smart move.
Does anyone have any suggestions for additional basic goals?
Uh-oh, we're at the precipice of diving into the weeds.
Commissioner Scales, anything additional on the basic goals themselves? No? Very good. All right, now who wants to start, I think the phrase was dive into the weeds. Let's start with staff. Did you have any specific things you wanted to discuss with us on these?
No, I mean, we're, given these few changes to the top line goals, I mean, I think we're reasonably comfortable with where we're at. Happy to get down into each of the five tonight, or we can talk about the remainder of the plan. It's entirely the planning commission's discussion.
What would be of most use to you?
It would be, I think, beneficial to make sure that we get through all the top line stuff. So get through the rest of the plan, and then we can have a conversation on how you want to proceed in getting into the nuts and bolts of, because the overall nuts and bolts, like I think we all know. I mean, it's functionally three pieces, four. You've got all the stuff that we need to include, talking about the infrastructure, talking about transportation, talking about natural features, executive summary, all that stuff. By and large, happy to talk about that as much as you want, but there's not a whole lot that's going to change there unless you want to get into specific language changes. You've got the goals and objectives, which of the five, we've talked about the top line now. We can make those changes and coordinate that. You've got the future land use plan, which has under 10 changes proposed this time around. And you've got the urban service boundary, which has 2 changes. So if we can get through those sort of 3 big top line things, get into a good place with those, so that at our next meeting, if we can get into the weeds of the goals and objectives, we can get in the weeds of just one of them if we wanted to. And as long as we're comfortable, what I want to make sure that we are is at the next meeting, comfortable with the draft to be able to at least get it out in the world We can keep changing it, we can keep talking about it, but we need to be able to get it out in the world. That's the key.
Can I make a process suggestion? Go ahead. In terms of the goals and objectives, specific recommendations, we have seen all those before. They all look familiar to me, and I don't have any problem with them. The way they're presented, I think, yeah, some of them don't match an existing goal, but most of them do, and the more they can be mapped or grouped together, the more it's going to help the reader to say, okay, these are the more specific stuff that pertain to that. But we don't want to try to do that as a group, I'm sure. So my request would be, I can certainly make suggestions offline to staff about ways it might be more clearly presented and take a swing rather than trying to get into all that.
Yeah, as I've said all along, we are happy to take any and all comments on or offline. We'll coordinate them as best we can.
Right. Because I do think we want to spend time talking about the urban service boundary and the future land use map. We should, again, look at it, but we've seen it in detail.
Right.
Those two changes.
Yes.
Talk about urban service boundary?
Yes.
Yes.
And just looking at all the goals, and maybe this isn't part of it, but I don't see anything about public safety.
So, it's obviously an important goal for the township in general, but it's how to work it into a development-oriented plan is a bit of a struggle. And that's, our previous plan had a specific set of goals about, the public service goal was a lot broader, and it talked about specific things within the department, within the township as a whole. And it's the one section I would argue that almost nothing really got done while everything got done, because it was just talking about operations kind of thing. Certainly open to having that conversation, but there really wasn't a good way from our perspective to sort of put it in here. It's really more of a township board, annual or biannual goal and a goal for the board.
Okay. Because I was thinking like things like lighting, street lighting, traffic signals. Those are probably more.
Yeah, and that's really nuts and bolts of, although, to your point, in circling back to the conversation we had about inverting the transportation planning model, that's certainly the kind of thing that's going to come up during a conversation of transportation planning. So it might just be one of those specific items that comes up during a discussion elsewhere.
Thanks.
Are we on to USB?
I was just thinking that it also could come up to
future land use.
maintaining outstanding public service.
Right. Right.
We can, let us take a crack at, and see if we can come up with some language on that. So future land use is the next big piece. It's really broken in, it breaks itself into two parts really easily. You've got the relatively easy changes, which are frankly, we found some errors in the existing map, notably County Line Road, Margate, where it's the properties that are designated as park that are actually people's houses. We should probably change that. The Schultz Vet Clinic, which as we had that conversation about their expansion, the fact that it's zoned residential and, they are getting to the point of talking retirement, all of a sudden that becomes a very difficult property to have a second life if they are no longer there. So we're recommending that be converted to office, business technology, so it could be rezoned to office in the future and used as an office building, since it is an office building at its heart. And then lastly, adding the Meridian Mall as a PICA, which I think everyone agrees is probably a good idea. So those are the relatively easy ones. And the other ones, which aren't that big of change, but are bigger changes, the vacant land adjacent to Copper Creek, which was always intended to be the expansion of Copper Creek, is proposed to be changed so it's consistent with Copper Creek and the other surrounding residential properties in the area. It only makes sense to be consistent with the surrounding properties. The northern third of Faith Lutheran Church, which the church has discussed with the Planning Commission multiple times, of converting that to multifamily residential to be consistent with the property to the north, is one of those proposed changes. And the last one is the driving range on Grand River, just east of Powell Road, is currently designated for residential, even though it's on Grand River and it's currently used as commercial property. And so staff is recommending that be designated as commercial to be consistent with its use. That's really the extent of the changes to the future land use map. Again, this is a update. We're not proposing any major overhaul at this point. There certainly was discussion previously about we had discussion about the Saginaw Road corridor, and that potentially becomes a corridor study, which was in the goals and objectives. We've had conversation about Meridian Mall and what comes of that. That becomes its own study. Things like that will come out and potentially be changes in the future, but we're not in a position, I think, to make those recommendations at this point.
Any comments or questions? Commissioner Skibbs?
I'd like to go back to the Saginaw Road corridor. I mean, that's basically the last buildable area within the township. And like we were speaking about the mall, do we want to present some type of framework of what we'd like to see there, or take what we get?
So I think what we are recommending in this document, and I'm trying to find it real quick, is that we actually do a corridor study on that area, to your point, to provide a framework for what we would like to see in that area, because it's under the enhance the viability of township businesses. So evaluate the M78 corridor for a detailed analysis of future land use, given market changes since the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think we agree we should probably give it a little more thought. But I can't tell you what the answer is, because we're still trying to figure out what the market might be after all the past couple of years.
That's currently zoned commercial?
So the corridor has a lot of different zonings. There is single-family residential, there's multifamily residential, there's commercial, there's industrial. I think there's also some rural in there. So it would behoove us to get a little more cohesive up there.
I don't see industrial on the key for the future land use map. Is it changing to business technology?
So,
Is it no, not institutional.
Could you display that for us, please?
yeah, I just gotta get to the right spot. So, I'm not on the right page, I apologize. Let's go ahead and do this, actually, this will help.
There we go.
So it's the light blue, right? Help me out.
Yeah, I was gonna guess that.
The light blue, that is correct.
Okay, so that's
It falls under the business technology, yeah. So you have a little bit in this area, and then you have a little bit up here.
I guess how is that gonna work with ordinance and with previous iterations of the map?
So it's consistent with previous iterations. We
It
haven't
is,
we haven't
okay.
changed that.
It wasn't previously termed industrial.
Yeah, it hasn't been turned industrial in the last couple plans. I don't know that we've ever turned it industrial.
But it is zoned industrial.
It is, and so,
And it doesn't have a cross-reference
Yeah.
on your zoning plan.
well, then we have found an error.
And I think just as a, a common, just a common layperson, if I see business technology, I'm not thinking industrial.
Right.
So, let's see if I can zoom in on it enough here. So it shows up right here with the business technology, PO.
Oh, there's industrial, okay, there's that little I.
I think though, it's still misleading. It should probably be included in the light blue, business technology / industrial.
Like in the legend?
Yeah.
Yeah. How hard is that?
We can absolutely make that change.
Don Ave is the same
Yeah.
truck kind of thing?
Yep. That's easy.
Industrial.
I'm don't particularly want to add a new category at this point.
Right, no.
It becomes slightly more complicated.
Yeah, when your goal is eliminating some of the categories.
That's my comment on your future land use plan is I would support all of those. They're reasonable changes in the situation, especially with the study on the M78 corridor coming up.
I appreciate too that it's detailed out that, COVID has had an impact on development and has caused many delays and postponements. So I just appreciate that that's in there. I think that needs to be stated.
I agree this section's perfect. With the addition of a slash and an I and a legend, not legend.
You got it. So really, the last of the top line pieces is the urban service boundary, and these are the two proposed changes. Let's do this. That is the Green Road change. Again, this is me hating the fact that you don't split things. It's just not how planners work.
I'm sorry, I want to make a quick point about that. When we discussed that, you asked us to reach out to the landowners. We did get one yes and one no. So that's how that was determined, how that line was going to go.
That is at the planning commission's request.
Wait, one yes and one no to what?
There are two landowners that were split by the original line.
Sure.
One said yes, they want to be in. One said no, they want to be out.
Oh,
Solomon's choice.
perfect.
That's why it jogs the way it does. Functionally, it will have no impact on either of their lives. It's just needed to. My ADHD self needed that line cleaned up.
So where the other one isn't.
And then the other change, as we've previously discussed, is the Powell Road change. Previous goes in and out, cuts the driving range in half, included at the time, which this wasn't there at the time, it was obviously under development. Staff is recommending straight line, including all the properties on Powell Road. It avoids a lot of potential problems, the least of which, not the least of which was the discussion when the school district wanted to build. Certainly a number of heads turned toward me and said, okay, what effect does the urban service boundary have on that? And we never got to a final answer because we didn't need to, but at some point there will need to be a discussion about that if they're out of the urban service boundary because, they functionally override us in all but 4 areas locally. Our zoning has no say pretty much whatsoever on schools. It's really curb cuts, utility connections, soil erosion control, and there's always a fourth that I forget.
Wetlands probably.
I'm sorry?
Wetlands probably.
Nope, they're exempt from our zoning.
But they're under the state one.
So they're under state, yes. That's the only thing they would be under. So, it became clear that that property probably needed to be included within the boundary. The golf course was cut in half already, and the fact that the neighboring property was in, this property is already developed, and this property will never develop given the nature of that property. This seemed like a natural inclusion, and then you're left with these 4 properties up here, which have previously been subject to threatened litigation. And so it just makes sense to, from staff's perspective, where that red line is now. But obviously, it is not my plan.
Question. I'm trying to look, and I don't see it on the phone either, but what is the dotted line? Is there a legend here?
So the dotted line is the existing, where the line is now.
And the red line is.
In the current map, the red is the proposed line.
Gotcha. Oh, proposed
Yeah,
boundary.
so this is
Oh,
what we
it says
had.
it right here.
Right.
Got it. That's what I'm missing.
The primary benefit is it eliminates guesswork. There's no doubt about what.
It makes it very straightforward.
I'm going to nitpick wordsmith for a second here, and I'm sure I've seen this paragraph before, but I've tried to make sense of it on a train in the middle of the night, and I couldn't. The third paragraph of this section describes the logic by which the urban service boundary should or should not be changed. Should be based on development surrounding the USB, the lack of development opportunities in the western portion of the township, economic benefit and burden of modifying the boundary, or a compelling public health or safety issue. And that sounds very reasonable to me. Then the first case has nothing to do with any of those criteria. So it would seem politic to say something in there about, or something that just was probably a map error, but doesn't rise to any of the criteria that have just been laid out. And I think we will be having a discussion about what criteria we might use in proposing changes to the urban service boundary, but I get the impression that we might not pull that off by the time we need to get this plan done, but we're going to continue to have that discussion. So I'm just focusing on that paragraph and saying, are we establishing a policy here that includes the criteria by which future suggestions will be judged? And if so, let's give them a good hard look.
I will only say that the majority of this language is in the existing plan as well.
Yeah.
This
Good.
is just us trying to put it in more readable format.
So if we could just justify that.
Yeah, we can add the map error comment, no problem.
I think I'd use that as a justification for the small adjustment at the end. I mean, rather than for anything else, it just makes it easier from a property owner standpoint to know.
Yeah.
If they built a house on the wrong side of the line, could they get sewage?
And if one of them was going to sell, that it could be a very compelling economic issue. It could be an economic burden, and that's kind of in there. But anyway.
Maybe to them, they build it on the right side.
The other wording is in the first paragraph of the next page, and it's a second full sentence that says, previously the boundary included some but not all properties, leading to a situation where neighboring properties may be treated differently from a development perspective. So it's kind of laying out the rationale for why you would straighten that line, because neighbors were treated differently by the shape of the line. And I've finally came to realize that what that sentence is talking about is literally the definition of zoning. Right? If my property is this side of the line, then I have these rights, and if your property is that side of the line, then you have those rights. So having a condition where neighboring properties are treated differently as a cause for change, well, that's always going to be the case. That's what, as soon as you draw the line, people are being treated differently. Move the line, people are being treated. So as a rationale for why you would make this change, it doesn't, I can't square it. No matter what you do, there's going to be neighbors treated differently. Now, if neighbors were treated unfairly or something, then that I would want to rectify, but the first one was an error. Somebody drew the line wrong. This one, the line was drawn. And the question is this the time where we undo that unstraight line? And I think if we're going to do that, we want to have, again, what are the criteria that are listed in the first paragraph here? How do they justify the second case? I don't, if it's the economic burden that is presumably imposed on the owners of the parcels now to be included by the prior exclusion, then if that's the basis on which we're making the decision, when we've discussed this in the past, I've heard the argument made that straight lines are more defensible. And when you're out in the prairie, that makes a lot of sense to me. But I'm not sure that, and I know that staff have been clear that the urban service boundary is a tricky planning tool anyway. It's rare. And it gets challenged. And you would like not to have something that causes you to end up spend all your time in court. So I think my suggestion is that maybe the township's attorneys could look at the language that's kind of justifying the changes that are being proposed, because I think the board may well have those questions as well. And if it's just coming from the old plan, then it's their fault, because they were on the planning commission at the time.
And I would ask staff, have you identified or determined whether or not this change has any adverse impact on any resident? Because that would be important as well.
There is not an obvious adverse impact on any resident. I mean, to the north, you have literally a stub coming to the south, so development's certainly anticipated here. You have a stub that the township required here to the north.
I'm thinking more of the other picture.
Oh, and this one?
Yes.
Functionally, there's a house on this property and there's a house on this property already. So it should have no impact on either property owner.
I think they got to choose. Right?
Wait a minute. Mm-hmm. Will that require them to hook up to a sewer?
It will not.
No.
Okay. So
The letter that I sent to the owners made that clear. They're not required to hook up. It gave them the opportunity.
if their septic fails, then will that require them to hook up to a sewer?
You're the magistrate.
It would be cheaper to fix their septic system than to extend the line and hook up to the.
But that
not
didn't answer my,
require them to do
that didn't answer my question. My question is, if their septic fails,
There's no requirement.
There's no
that they can
requirement.
they be
to hook up to
required to
sewers.
hook up?
This is more
Okay.
rational. Isn't that more rationalized?
That's all we're doing.
Yeah. It occurs to a couple of us at least, the word we're looking for is rationalize the boundary.
Yes.
We can work on better rationalizing that. You know, I go back to, it was funny, I was actually on a call about this before I even started this job with our attorneys, because the existing map actually has an exception written into it already for these four properties. Because we were concerned about being sued, because we were in active litigation over the sewer district there.
The payback district.
Payback district. And so there was already an exception sort of casually written in that functionally covered these four properties, and in theory, the school district property, if the school district ever sold it, but they had no intention to do so. So we're really trying to take out the exceptions and make this a line that is very easily defensible. So we'll work on rationalizing it a little better, and we'll touch base with the attorneys and see if they always have a suggestion.
I like everything you just said. The fact those stub streets are there, the exception that was written in, those are really the reasons we're doing this. So let's,
Right.
give the info and
Right.
be straight up.
I remember those lawsuits.
And it,
I mean, isn't Cornell, isn't it a natural beauty, designated natural beauty? road
Yeah.
Too? And does that help to rationalize?
I think from our perspective, you're never going to develop anything substantial on Cornell Road. I mean, the amount of even though Cornell to the south it's just a different animal north of Grand River. It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Where do you want us to go from here, Tim?
So from our perspective, we've got the top line stuff. We're perfectly happy with this conversation. Make some changes to the goals and objectives, make some changes to this discussion, and bring it back next meeting, and you guys can get into the weeds on goals and objectives if you'd like. Or we can continue whatever conversation you'd like. I mean, I can certainly go through the build out further. I mean, I think one of the things with this is just a jumping off point for us. We anticipate spending a lot more time on this in the years to come, and I'll be honest, this is just one of my pet projects. I've done this at every community I've been at. It's an interesting math problem, really, for us to better understand where the community is going.
Do you want to address the questions that Mr. Brooks submitted?
Yeah,
Actually, if I could, really quick, the build-out analysis, I was wondering if, I don't know, I know this came up in the past, a map of these areas. I think that came up during one of our meetings. I don't know if that's even possible, or if that's just going to crush
It's not
somebody's
yet.
workload.
It will be. It will
It would
be.
be very fascinating, and if it were possible to include it in this publication, but I understand too, it's obviously probably not necessary.
It will be. That's one of the things we want to create is a better visual representation of this, because one of the things we found in our data was that it's picking up every common area for every subdivision. So the last thing I want to do is put out a map that shows, Cornell Woods common area being developed.
Yeah.
So we just need to refine that data, but that is definitely on our list.
Commissioner Snyder has suggested this in the past, and I think staff said it might be possible, since we have the big urban service boundary discussion and we have this build-out analysis comes right after it. The natural question people ask is, is it 60-40? How much is in, how much is out? Without publishing a detailed map that shows Cornell Woods Property Association, but at least says of this portion, right?
So you're talking
Build-out analysis, right? Of the 375, of the 3,528, how many of them are out there in the boonies that we're trying to preserve, and how many of them are infill? And you already said 1,000 of them are already approved, so we know about that. But the rest, is the development pressure coming from, going to be satisfied within or outside that boundary? Potentially, it seems like a fairly easy map operation. But there's all those little bits and pieces, so a rough
Yeah.
pie chart,
we can give you a rough in versus out. That's not that hard.
Is the build-out analysis part of the master plan? Is it?
Can I make a comment? Just an observation. I want to say thank you to the staff. You really have done a real good job in putting this together and helping to lead us through this and making it a lot less painful and a lot easier on us to comprehend and understand. And I appreciate it.
Thank you. And from a staff's perspective, we appreciate the Planning Commission indulging us along the way of drip feeding this, because this is, because it's an update, we didn't want to just drop, okay, it's not that big of a document, especially compared to the last one. But it was helpful to have that conversation along the way and make sure we're on the right track, as Brian was writing a whole bunch of stuff that we then got in and put it with communications and told them to make it look pretty.
Did we want to catch Commissioner Brooks' question about develop more robust build-out analysis, taking natural features into account, can be more specific? And what about purchase of development rights? Those are great things.
Yeah, so the idea of the more robust build-out analysis is, and taking natural features into account, is right now functionally what it does is we took and Brian pulled a map of all of the vacant properties. I'm sorry, Senior Planner Shorkey pulled a map of all the vacant properties. And then what we did is we just applied a factor to it of 75% yield. That for any property, in theory, we believe you can get 75% buildable area. It's a very crude tool right now. What we'd like to do as we go forward is start to overlay that map with the wetlands map, overlay that map with known drainage courses, overlay that map with things like, with other natural features items that are going to potentially on certain properties drop that 75 down to 25, 50, whatever the number is. Whereas in other areas, you might already have access to utilities, you might already have road network there, that your yield can go up and you might get a couple more units over there. And so what we want to do is we want to just get a little more granular in how we do this analysis. So we're giving people a better sense of what might come. And then the purchase development rights idea is something that I've kicked around in the back of my head. I've mentioned it to Parks a couple times. The idea of a purchase development rights is you are acquiring, as a township, as a municipality, acquiring the ability to develop that property. And so usually it's a single family house on like a bunch of acreage. So that property would never be developed, but it would still be owned by the people. You'd have an easement over it to conserve the property or something of that nature. It's a bit of a hybrid between our land preservation purchases and sort of what areas around a lot of larger communities, Ann Arbor has it, I believe Kalamazoo has it, where they purchase the development rights of farm fields so that you'll always have the farm fields there. And it creates sort of the green ring around the community. It's just a concept. We don't even know if it's legal or doable, but as we transition away from flat out buying properties under the land preservation program, it might be an interesting alternative in certain circumstances. So it's something we wanted to look into going forward.
If I'm not mistaken, for some time, the Sander Preserve on Dobie was held in a kind of a rolling 10-year easement fashion.
That is my understanding.
Converted to township
Yeah, that's my understanding.
property. So there are mechanisms out there, and the more we explore them, the better.
It occurs to me, I'm sorry, did you want to say? Oh, I thought you.
No.
Okay. It occurs to me that part of what's in Commissioner Brooks's question here is the same thing that occurred to me when I was reading this, and that is, I think we need a clearer definition of what a build-out analysis is.
Okay.
It's not all township officials or township attorneys who are going to be reading this, and I think the public is going to get lost when they look at this and try to figure out what it is you're really talking about. And I think that would help Commissioner Brooks in answering this question.
That's great feedback.
I also think that this section, because it is, what we have now is very preliminary and rough, should be more aspirational and future planning as opposed to, this sort of lays it out as this is what it is, to indicate that you're going forward with a more detailed and more robust analysis.
Yeah, that brings in the question is this strictly a mathematical guess as to what's going to happen, or does it include the aspirational aspect of the master plan?
It is a mathematical guess based on current zoning.
You're doing this for residential or for all property?
Purely residential right now.
And maybe it's something that you put under the preserve and enhance residential opportunities as expanding on a build-out analysis to determine what the opportunities are within this goal, or at least reference it.
I suggested a bar chart, but following our chair's suggestion, I think a histogram would be much more appropriate. Because then you can just let the tail go out and nobody cares. We understand it's a bunch of mapping errors, but there's some big ones, and then we'll know, because there's some great big ones and then a whole bunch of small ones, right? So I think that avoids the mapping issue, but it'll give people a feel for where what kinds of lots that stuff's going to go on, even if you're not pointing out individuals. ArcGIS will give a nice little history.
Anyone else have any comments or questions about this section?
Oh, I've got a whole bunch of little marks I'm gonna give them afterwards. Same with the transportation. I like everything that's in there, just editing. Copy editing.
I'm sorry?
Just copy editing.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Got in those two sections at this point.
Yeah.
Mr. Schmidt, let me ask you something that's, there are other subdivisions of township government that also control land use, parks, and recreation facilities. The Downtown Development Authority, is that subordinate to the master plan, or do they follow their own plan?
So they have an integrated plan, but it is not it's not a land use plan in the traditional sense. The DDA integrated plan essentially outlines how they will spend their tax capture dollars and what they can spend that on. It gets into a little bit, it plays in the field because it talks about, beautification efforts, and it talks about supporting existing businesses, and it talks about facade improvements, things like that. So it's on the edge, and I think that's why we've given it some reference that, we'll help we need to help the DDA update that. It's time. Same with the parks. We'll hopefully play a bigger role in helping the Parks Commission update their plan in 2 years, I think it is. And so hopefully our concept here is that we kind of become the umbrella and we kind of help everybody.
Yeah, that's been a constant question in my mind as I liaison with the DDA. It's almost like they're a separate city completely surrounded by the township.
And in many communities they are. In many communities they're separate from the government in general. They have their own staff and their own board and their own building. It really just depends on how the community really has it function.
So the master plan should simply reference them as one of the units that we have to coordinate with.
Yes. We take more over control on land use, but they take more over control on the nuts and bolts in their area.
Yeah, I think the CIA also now has tax capture authority, so
Going to be very similar,
all
yep.
those links they'll be especially involved in those micro plans. I'm sorry, what was the terminology? In the PICAs.
Small area plans.
Small area plans. That's, I think, where we engage most closely with those groups.
I would agree.
Where do we go from here?
We're in great shape for this evening. This helps us get to closer to a draft. I think, with the planning commission's grace, we will make some of these changes, try to get this language tightened up. And then if you guys want to, next meeting, get into the nuts and nitty gritty of the goals and objectives, that's to your purview. But I think what we'll do at the next meeting is sort of present what we hope is a final preliminary draft to be distributed.
All right.
But thank you. This is an excellent conversation. It helps us tremendously.
And we can report back to Commissioner Brooks that we did in fact consider some of his suggestions.
And we'll discuss them, I think, a little more once we get into the nuts and bolts.
All right, then let's move on to item 11 on our agenda, reports and announcements. First is Township Board update.
I will just point out that the Township Board is taking up the SUPs for the medical marijuana licensees still. There's scheduling. We're getting there. That's really the main item at this point.
Liaison reports? Anyone? All right, let me tell you mine. I appeared at the Downtown Development Authority meeting, and I gave Brian a comprehensive, it was more than just an agenda. They are going through facade improvement, financing and regulation for the business establishments within the DDA. It's very comprehensive, a lot of money involved, and their concern is how they retain control over the facade and what happens if they give somebody money and then he goes out of business before he makes the improvement, that type of thing. But it's an extensive document. I gave it to Brian, and anyone who's interested in taking a look through that, it is interesting, and he has it available for anyone who wants to see it. But they're doing a lot of work. I'm very impressed with their staff. She's quite an impressive lady. She does a lot of work for them. So, any other liaisons? No?
You know, we were talking earlier, I saw a copy of the township's hazard management plan update that the board just adopted, and it just occurred to me that that doesn't get mentioned in here. And there may be a spot where folks can be pointed to it if it's of interest. Document doesn't have enough links. I read in the minutes that the document had too many links. I have not been trying the links, but I'm a big fan of links that work.
All these links work.
Links that keep, yeah.
Entry number 12, project report.
We have nothing major this evening. I hope to have some updates on some projects in the next few weeks here. There's a lot of things getting ready to pop.
Item 13, the record should reflect there are no members of the public here for public remarks. Commissioner comments. This is something we put in after a couple of meetings ago when people just wanted to express something at the end of the meeting. Does anyone have any comments they wish to place? No? Then is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
I support the motion to adjourn.
All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, folks.